Good evening and welcome to JW3. Those of you who are regulars, maybe you've never been here before, maybe you haven't been here for a while. Maybe I haven't spoken to a mic for a while. Okay, I'm going to hold it a little bit further away. It is lovely to see your faces here tonight. We also have, this is being recorded, which is why I'm holding a mic, even though you're quite close to me, and tonight's guest will as well. So hello to all of you watching from around the country and around the world as well. JW3, if you don't know us, we are Europe's largest and leading Jewish arts and cultural centre, housing theatre, cinema, classes, workshops, a community kitchen and lots more. We explore Jewish culture from its very core to its margins, and we create the possibilities of what it could be as well. Tonight's event, the Modern Loss Handbook, is in association with an organisation who we love working with. Reboot are based in the US, and they reimagine and reinforce Jewish thoughts and traditions. They have a network of preeminent creators, activists, artists, and they produce experiences and products like this book and like many others, which transform society. This feels like, for me, a very apposite moment to be launching the UK publication of Modern Loss. We are still learning how to be in our renewed age of gathering, and we're navigating the losses which we have faced alone or in small groups during the pandemic. Also, this moment feels very crucial for this launch because about a month ago, we of course witnessed the funeral of the key British establishment figure, and it uncovered many differing and sometimes surprising reactions. So in conversation tonight, we have two remarkable people and remarkable writers whose books both generously offer whose books generously offer their own narrative and strategies for navigating loss, understanding grief, roadmaps for resilience. I will let our chair, Pete, introduce Rebecca, but I will say that we are so thrilled to have Pete Paphides back on this stage. He has written about music for The Times, The Guardian, Observer, Uncut, Mojo. He hosts a weekly show for Soho Radio, and his memoir, which came out last year, Broken Greek, is remarkable. It won the Royal Society of Literature's Christopher Bland Prize and the Penderyn Music Book of the Year Award. Both books are on sale tonight, and you can buy them directly after the event. Over to Pete and Rebecca. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to not let Rebecca speak for a minute, if I can be tyrannical. Thanks for coming out to keep us company and hopefully participate in tonight's get-together here at JW3. There are all sorts of conventions around loss and grief which, whilst useful to newly arrived aliens disguised as humans trying to blend in, they can also be somewhat constraining for people who have experienced loss. This is where Modern Loss comes in. Described by its co-founder, Rebecca Soffer, as a portal that can draw people out of their isolation from anywhere they have a device, and a platform that allows us to bear their grief fearlessly to an audience of strangers who get it. Modern Loss is a website/online magazine which has over time grown into a community of kindred souls who have all lost loved ones and seek a judgment-free space in which to commune and share their experiences. And in the 9 years since Rebecca created it with Gabrielle Berkner in New York, Modern Loss has become something of a phenomenon, resulting most recently in this brand new book, the Modern Loss Handbook, that is out and really a vital companion for anyone going through this process, a process that can often be a lot longer than you expect it to be. If you want to know what the general vibe is here, you could do worse than read the opening lines of Rebecca's introduction to the first Modern Loss writing anthology, which opens with the sentence, 8 hours after I'd learned my mother Shelby had been killed on the New Jersey Turnpike, my best friend's husband, Paul, found my vibrator. I'm delighted to say she's here to elaborate. Rebecca, hi.
Hi, Paul. Well, Pete, see, you threw me so off.
Sorry, I didn't mean to fluster you. It's just that you're so confident on the page.
I was confident in the privacy, as we say, of my writing room many years ago. I felt emboldened to write that, and then it struck me upon publication day that I was not the only person that was going to read that sentence.
And I know, like, when you're writing as well, when you're writing a book, you sort of play all sorts of tricks on yourself, don't you? You sort of pretend that no one's
going to know.
Yeah,
no one's going to know what's coming out. Yeah, because, like, most of the time, like, no one does buy your book. So, you know, like no one's going to know. But, like, people did actually buy that, for which I'm very grateful. But now everyone knows that I, at least in the past, did have a vibrator. And I will say, to my credit, that it was New York in like 2006. Sex in the City was like, everyone had a freaking vibrator. Like my janitor had a vibrator, my doorman. It was par for the course. I would have been an anomaly had I not had one. I'm going to stop talking about that now.
No, it's fine. And they're very useful. You can use them probably to sort of bang nails into walls and stuff.
It depends on which one you have.
Yeah.
Yet again, and it's like a weird moment for me to thank Reboot for bringing me here, but I just want to do that and just say that, like, I'm so excited to be having this conversation as irreverent as clearly it's going to be. And I'm delighted that you're the one that's going to be asking me these questions. Thank you so much, and very grateful for Reboot, which is an organization which is so incredibly close to my heart, has encouraged my creativity, really sparked community over the years, and yeah, it's a great combination of people and organizations to bring this conversation to fruition.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's this, you know, I'm sort of, it's an experience I'm going through because I lost my father a few months ago. So I found all sorts of things, you know, if this feels like as close as a book can be to sort of the companion who really sort of gets it, just when you need to have someone around who sort of gets it without judgment. In it, you talk about resilience, and you liken it to a muscle. You say that it's sort of just like, you know, a muscle can get stronger if it's kind of used more and more. That applies to resilience as well.
Yeah, I think that, you know, so when I write a lot, and anybody who, you know, for anyone who doesn't know Modern Loss, as you said, I co-founded it 9 years ago with Gabby Berkner, a friend of mine, as an online magazine that published narrowly focused essays around one aspect of the long arc of the loss and grief experience. And that means like stories about sex and finance and identity and like, where am I going to live, and am I going to have kids, and like, well, am I type A now or am I type B? You know, all the things that are affected by colored by our experience with loss. You know, in the ensuing years, it's grown into so much more. And so a lot of the talk that we focus on is about resilience, because we're trying to encourage our community to figure out ways to pull each other through this darkness and this murkiness and this mess, and figure out how to pull some like meaning from this shitstorm, you know? And resilience has become kind of a buzzword in the last few years. It's like, you know, I think I read about in the book, it's like, as maybe banal sounding as like me time or like hydrate, you know, it's like, all, you know, don't forget your resilience, and like, oh, we're year 3 of COVID, we're all resilient, but what does that even mean? And the truth is that if you read about resilience, it is like a muscle, like it is something that you can build. Yeah. And frequently, a lot of us can figure out the resilience that we're capable of through the lens of what we've already experienced. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be the death of someone. Yeah. It just has to be something that was really hard for us to have passed through. And when we realize that we've done that, and that it didn't kind of end us spiritually or physically, it's just a good reminder that maybe sometimes you can do, or frequently you can do, hard things.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, the existence of Modern Loss itself is testament to that, because, you know, to grow something as big as this out of this sort of experience you sort of went through, and so, I mean, it started with the death of your mother, didn't it?
It did, yeah. My grief card arrived on September 4th, 2006. when my mom was killed in a car accident at about 11:45 at night on the New Jersey Turnpike, which anybody, I know we're in London now, but just imagine that you died in like the most like obnoxiously insulting road that you could possibly think of, and like that's the New Jersey Turnpike to me. And
is that like the road? I'm imagining like the road in the video to "Everybody Hurts" by REM, where they're all stuck in a big traffic jam,
Yeah.
and people are losing their
yeah, it's as like much of a downer as that, and it's definitely a downer because it resulted in like a dead mother for me, and so my entry point into really profound loss that really did like shake me at my very core was the death of my mom. I had experienced loss before that, but nothing like this.
Because you're an only child as well. So, and you've spoken about, in that kind of dynamic of your parents as being the two people who sort of uniquely bore witness to your upbringing. And of course, when they're gone, then that's gone as well.
Yeah, it's hard to lose your witnesses. I think that that's not something that was like a visceral realization for me. Like the minute I found out my mom died, I wasn't like, like who's gonna remember everything for me, or like who's gonna remind me of things, or like tell me that I had like colic when I have a baby. That wasn't my first thought. My first thought was like, how do I navigate a world without a mother? I don't understand that. And what I really didn't understand at that moment was that means so many different things. It means like, how do I not be mothered by someone who's alive? How do I not be guided? How do I not have like logistical help or, emotional help? But also, how do I do it without someone who's a real primary witness to my life? And I think that's something that in grief we don't really talk about enough. And I think that it would help us support each other if we also recognize that like someone who is grieving a lot of secondary things. They're not just grieving that person's death, they're grieving what could have been, what might have been, and that's really hard.
Yeah, you sort of, that's a very important point, I think, the sense of, a future that you will never a future that perpetually remains open to conjecture. And you sort of explore ways of dealing with that as well in the book. Were you the sort of person who, prior to a sort of cataclysmic event like that happening, did you sort of think, I should start trying to imagine it now because I don't want to be too thrown into shock?
That's an interesting question. The answer is yes, but it wasn't with my mom. So the joke was on all of us because my dad was significantly older than my mom is or was. And so we kind of all were like, well, when dad dies, like we would literally talk about this as though like we talk about it like over bagels. We'd be like, well, when dad dies, and like my dad would be like, I'm literally right here. Like, and we're like, well, you're probably going first and whatever. But we just kind of imagine that because why wouldn't it happen like that? That is the timeline. He was born first, so he would die first. And isn't that adorable that that's how we thought, that we didn't really fully realize that there are no givens in terms of length or timeline or order of anything, that the universe doesn't care about that.
No.
And so my mom was the one who died first, and that threw everyone for a loop because not only did we not prepare for it emotionally, but logistically, no one prepared for that. No one. So it was a real mess in terms of everything.
Oh God, the admin that comes with death is just...
Yeah, I call them the insults to injury.
Yes.
Yeah. Like you also have to like figure out how to transfer a deed and get death certificates and do all these things while you're like, you can't feel your extremities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember sort of, I spent an inordinate amount of time after in the weeks after my dad died, just dealing with the results of a parking fine that escalated over time because he couldn't use the app that you have to use, and it's just these sort of, and it does feel like a sort of cosmic joke. Let me pick up as well on what you said about those, the world doesn't care about whether or not you thought, your dad was going to go before your mum. And there's a great quote from Gabrielle Bertner, who, as we said, you're a co-founder of Modern Loss, who says, "We live in an unruly world and convince ourselves that we can will it to behave, We hear of someone diagnosed with lung cancer and want to know if they'd ever smoked.
Yeah.
We read about a fatal car accident and wonder if the deceased had been wearing a seatbelt. We hear about homicide and begin to make assumptions about the victim's lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that we like thinking that if we have a certain amount of explanation for something, that means we can prevent it from happening to us.
Yeah.
And I think that is why we automatically, blurt out platitudes, or not even platitudes, I would just say completely inappropriate, unhelpful things to people, like what I was getting was, was she wearing a seatbelt? And I'm like, literally, how will this at all help you to support me in this conversation? Whether my mother was, how will this piece of knowledge help you to support me? And it really is I don't believe that people who ask these things, were they a smoker? Was she sick? Were there any signs? We ask these things frequently of others, and I think that we just don't realize that, it's not going to help you to prevent this from happening in your life. I think that that's our subconscious attempt to protect ourselves when we're faced with, learning about a situation that feels like there's no rhyme or reason to it, which frequently there is not,
No. And it's interesting to me that the two people that sort of have founded this organization were these very dynamic New Yorkers. You're a writer on the Stephen Colbert Show.
I was like, who are they?
Sorry?
I was like, who are the dynamic New Yorkers?
You were living a life that, we would all find incredibly sort of aspirational. You were working with one of the sort of top talk show hosts in the US. And with that, we have a certain conception of New York life, being successful in New York, where, you sort of can control, you have everything is at your fingertips. You have total control. I can imagine that when things are going well for someone in New York, you, and maybe even they, have the sort of impression that they can just they've got this whole thing sort of, under control. So it's sort of wild cards, like what happened to you, must be sort of doubly, the impact of them must be double.
Yeah, I think that for my personal experience was that I just felt like I was really beginning the build mode of my life. I just graduated from journalism school. I just got my master's in journalism, and then wisely or unwisely decided to take that and apply it to very low paid political satire work, which I do believe was holy work. But I felt like I was finally starting to cook with gas in my life. I was going to get rid of that Jennifer convertible sofa from college, which I'd had for 9 years. I was going to start figuring out how to get all the things, and people and experiences that I wanted. And then all of a sudden, I was faced with trying to figure out how to not only build my life, but also how to navigate it while dealing with profound loss. And that was just this weird juxtaposition that I didn't have any guidance about, because everybody I was working with at the Colbert Report was my age. I mean, I was 30. Everyone was in their late 20s, early 30s, and I was the guinea pig in many ways for my peers.
Yeah, you were. Yeah. There has to be, in any peer group, there has to be the first person.
Yeah, that was me. I was like the unwitting grief doula. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And not that you care about. You've got far too much going on to really care about how awkward we feel about how we approach a group. Because a lot of us have never had that before. We don't know what to say to someone.
Yeah.
You remember when you were a kid at home, and you're really nervous that, someone who's been widowed or something, they come over to, and a grown-up who's been widowed, you don't know, your temptation is to just run upstairs and hide until they've gone away, because you just don't know what to say to them.
Right, you don't, and we don't, and we don't, and I want to say the caveat or disclaimer or whatever is that I don't think that makes you a bad person. I think that it just shows that we don't have a lexicon that we can rely upon that isn't anchored in these platitudes or in these rote comments or in this I'm going to automatically say that's unimaginable, which is it's not. It's unimaginable to you're imagining it right now, which is why you're saying it's unimaginable, because you don't like imagining it. You're going to say they're in a better place because you don't know what else to say, because what I think that the place that they're much better in is here above ground, fully alive with you.
Do you think that a lot of what people do at situations like this, I almost feel like, and obviously it's quite fresh in my memory, I felt like a lot of what people were doing was just sort of, okay, there were words coming out, and those words had meaning in a dictionary, but what I was really hearing was a kind of benign grunting.
Yeah, I heard a lot of benign grunting.
Yeah.
Like it was like the Charlie Brown teacher, you know, like
Miss Othmar.
I can't. That's gonna live on the internet forever. So I'm not gonna continue with that noise. But you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, I think we all know what.
It's like the muted trumpet,
Yeah.
and I heard all this noise in the days and the weeks following my mother's death, and what we didn't talk about is that my father died 4 years after my mom. So that was the kicker. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, and then it did drop. And I just heard so many, it takes a year, or like they would have wanted you to be happy, or and it's like, I know they would have wanted me to be happy, but like I'm not actively happy right now.
How could I use this right now?
I don't know how to use this, right?
Yes.
Or like at least they got, with my dad, at least they got to meet your boyfriend, and I'm like, I guess, like, okay, now he can be dead, like it's all okay now, and that stuff just doesn't fly. And again, I'm going to keep repeating, it doesn't mean that the people who are offering these attempts that fall very flat are bad people, that they're totally unempathic. It doesn't mean that. It just means that we haven't normalized this as much as we desperately need to, because this entire world is full of grief and loss right now. It's not just death loss, it's so many layers of loss. We have to get better at talking about this so that you don't, like when you go through it, you, whoever the next person is, people aren't saying, well, was she sick? Or, at least you can always get pregnant again. And these are the things that we just kind of automatically go to. They don't work ever.
And when someone dies, it's not, as a kid, you sort of think, oh, well, that would just be the end of the world. There will be just uninterrupted misery from here on in, until maybe a point 2 years down the line where, like, the first time you laugh at a joke, but you probably won't laugh at a joke for 2 years, And I remember when, my first girlfriend, her mother died. And when her father died, her father and her mother died in quite close succession. And the day that her father died, obviously, I'm still a teenager. I don't know what to say at times like this. And so I'm sitting in a sort of somber room, and she feels she's nominally the host, so she puts out some kind of nuts into a bowl and kind of leaves them around the front room. And we're sitting in front of the fireplace, and she said, careful there, if you'll roast your nuts. It's sort of like a classic British double entendre. And then she started giggling she started laughing uncontrollably. I thought, she just lost her husband. Why is is that allowed? It was like amazing to me that was allowed.
Right.
And in your writing, you say that there's this moment where I think it was your piece about your mum's funeral. And the bit, I think you call it backstage.
Because I don't know what they call it at a funeral when you go see I just called it backstage, because I like Broadway.
And you're appalled at what the makeup job that they'd done on your mother.
So it's true, and you're right. And actually, that's a great joke that she said. You'll roast your nuts. I think we should all take a page from that. I think that a lot of us who aren't super familiar with grief on a firsthand basis think like, oh, it's not okay to laugh like ever or for a period of time, or you can't feel levity, or you can't feel nervous, humor. But, people ask me this, and I always say, like, when is it okay to laugh? And I say, well, first, I'm not like the arbiter of like grief. Like, I'm not like Emily Post, like I'm just me. I'm just Rebecca. Like, I'm not here to tell you what you can or can't do. I'm just here to tell you that probably whatever is happening with you, as long as it's not hurting yourself or anybody else, is totally normal and okay. And why wouldn't you grab onto these moments of levity and lightness? Because, like, I assure you, you're going to feel terrible a lot. Don't worry, like, you're gonna feel awful, I promise. So if you see an opportunity to make a gallows humor joke or to like laugh a little bit, for me, humor, first of all, I was working in comedy when my mom died, so I'm already somebody who really just gravitated toward humor and dark humor. And second, yes, when I was backstage at my mom's funeral, I was asked, do I wanna say goodbye? Do I wanna see her body? And I didn't really, but I felt like I owed it to, I'm like, I feel like I need to do that. And we opened the coffin, and she was wearing this like very, very garish coral shade of lipstick. And I hit the ceiling because it was like the ugliest color. I mean, it was like it's like one of those things that wouldn't look good on anyone ever. Like, I don't even know why they manufacture this color. And I had given them her Clinique lipstick, and they clearly just made an active choice not to use it. And she just looked so awful, mostly because she was not alive.
Right, yeah.
And didn't look like
that's
her.
a problem.
That was like
That
the
is a problem,
primary
yeah.
reason, right? So she already didn't look like herself, but I was like, at the very least, it would be nice to see the lipstick that I needed something to hold on to. And I found myself telling the funeral guy, because that's what they're called, right? Like, you used the wrong lipstick, and I found myself scrubbing this off of her, which not an easy feat because they use lots of stuff to keep it on for all eternity. Yeah, there's like a whole system. There's probably, I don't think she had like a green burial, you know? And I found myself scrubbing it off and then using my own lipstick to replace it. And only then was I like, you may close the coffin. And and I remember like later that day, I told my friends, and we were just laughing hysterically. And I have to say that like, it felt really good to laugh because it just like, it's not like, oh, endorphins, all that. It just, grief is such an alien experience. You're in just like this obliterated landscape that doesn't look familiar. And so when you find yourself like laughing at something, it just reminds you that you're kind of still in there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I had, you know, when I went, for some reason, you know, it's this almost like a nervous tick, or how a certain kind of social awkwardness in strange situations manifests itself. And so when I went to the funeral director to sort of have the discussion about, you know, what was going to happen at the funeral, and the sort of the brochure where, you know, they show you the coffins, and you don't know what, and obviously because my parents my dad was Greek Cypriot, and in that sort of community, there's a slight sense of like, okay, how did they get the cheapest coffin, or did they get the most expensive? And it feels a bit too showy to get the most expensive coffin, but also you don't want to be the guy that got the cheapest coffin.
That's why they offer the 3 options, because they're like, they'll choose B.
Well, the brochure I had about 15 options.
Oh wow, that's overwhelming.
So in the end, I just said to the woman, what do most people choose? Like what, you know, like I want a nice one, you know, but I don't want to show off, and I don't want to be like a cheapskate. What are all the other Cypriot people choosing?
What?
And she just went, shh, that one. So, like, we've been down this road many times before.
She did you a solid. I think that one of the worst things that you have to do in the like immediacy of grief after a loss is make decisions, right?
Yeah,
like the most overwhelming thing. 15 options is like it's literally like a Greek diner. Like, I always get overwhelmed and just like order the egg white omelet at a Greek diner, because it's like, am I getting the broiled scrod? Like, who orders that at a Greek? There's so many options.
Or like, you know, a Chinese takeaway where there are 200 things on the menu.
Right.
And,
I always just go for like garlic chicken with like steamed broccoli, and I think that's, you know, there is like a grief crossover there, because it is overwhelming to people and to make decisions. You have to make all these decisions about logistics and funerals and like, what are they going to wear forever, you know, if you're burying them, and it's all so overwhelming. And, you know, it's just really just to highlight that especially the immediacy, the early days of grief are just, they're like a tornado.
Yeah, and you suddenly see people who you thought you were never going to see again in your life. You know, suddenly they sort of appear. You think, oh, wow, okay, that's because I never thought, because I didn't really figure who I'd be meeting sort of a situation like this. Let's go back to the Modern Loss Handbook, because I'm just struck by just the huge amount of sort of practical kind of, you know, the practical stuff that there is, which sort of, you know, you can kind of get your hands dirty with in a way. And you're very good, I think, on sort of things like, you know, how social dynamics are affected, you know, in the wake of someone's death. Tell us a little bit about that as an example. Were all these all sort of things that you sort of had noticed through, partly through having built up this community of people who, you know, on a daily basis are sort of having these conversations on the website?
Yeah, I think that, you know, this book was written, this is my second book, and the first one was a collection of essays, which was like a really communal product and experience. And this was like the first thing that was like all on me, like, oh, not overwhelming at all. And so I put in there, yes, a lot of my own experiences, but also just the experience of, like you said, the Modern Loss community, which is this global community of people and contributors and everything who have taught me exponentially more than I could have ever just learned from my own experience about, you know, different points of view and cultural mores and attitudes and rituals, et cetera. And so, yeah, there's a whole section about how to navigate social dynamics and, you know, intimate relationships after loss. And there's a whole chapter because I just don't think we talk about it enough. It's like one of those, like I say, those like secondary losses, like losing a witness to your life. Another secondary loss we don't talk about is that your friends are probably not all going to show up for you in the way that you expect them to, or the way that, you know, you would like them to, or assumed that they naturally would because you always thought they were your rides or die. You know, the reality is that not everybody can be comfortable with discomfort.
Yeah.
And I would say the clinical term is it sucks because, you know, I'm clearly not a psychologist. It sucks because, you know, it feels very infuriating because you're like, well, I'm the one who has to deal with this primary grief.
Yeah.
Why can't you be comfortable enough in it to support me? And again, like hearkening back to, we just haven't normalized the topic enough. And if we only talked about this stuff and teased it out of the shadows and talked about it outside of just therapists or circles or religious, you know, gatherings, and just could do it more with like friendships and, you know, drinks and, you know, like Thursday nights in front of the TV with people, then we'd probably have more friends who are showing up for us in ways that actually come through, showing up for us in ways where even if they don't know what to say, they say, I wish I knew what to say, but I don't, but I really care about you and I'm here, as opposed to just completely disappearing, which some will do.
And actually, I think the way, you know, one thing that is actually very underrated is just physically being there, but not actually feeling the need to sort of say very much at all.
Yeah.
Just to say, you know, variations on that just really sucks. I can see that really sucks.
Yeah. It's true. It's called active listening. I mean, it's a great skill to have. We even have a piece about it on modernloss.com, like how to be an active listener. And I realize that sounds like a really like banal thing to say to someone. It's like, here's how you can be an active listener. But the truth is that we're really bad at listening, all of us. We have very short attention spans now. I can barely read like a 1,500 word piece in a publication. We're all just like overloaded, overwhelmed. But when you really just sit and listen to somebody, then I really believe that's how you can become more of an empathic person.
Yeah.
And a lot of us think, oh, I'm not really like naturally empathic, so I don't think I could be a good support to somebody going through something really hard that I can't relate to at all. But the truth is that all you really need to do is sit and listen to them. And when you have somebody who is saying, that sounds really hard, and it sounds so innocuous just to say that, right? Like to give someone advice, say, that sounds really hard, or I wish I knew the right thing to say, but I don't, but it sounds awful, and I'm here to listen, or to ask them questions like, what's hard about today? What's hard about this week? And make it very clear that there's literally nothing they can say that's going to scare you off.
It's actually very similar as a strategy. It's very similar to the strategy that that you deploy when dealing with typically with teenagers who are in a sort of anxiety spiral. And one thing that can accentuate that anxiety spiral is if you're just constantly coming up with possible solutions, possible fixes, because then it kind of inadvertently puts upon the other person a sort of places a pressure or responsibility on them to sort of, it's like you'll really say, look, I've given you the tools to get out of this slump.
You're basically negating that this is a really hard thing for them, right? You're like, oh, all you have to do is this and then it's over. And that's actually a really good example that you give. And I think, sometimes there are certain people in the world who want fixes. You know, for example, I'll just make a sweeping generalization about Americans. We really like fixing things. Now, there's a lot that's broken in our country, i.e. everything right now. But I think in general, we're known for having like this can-do attitude. It's like, oh, I know, like I know how to get it done. But like, this is something that doesn't have a fix. You know, grief has no fix. It has no vaccine. There's no pill. It's just doing, and then maybe feeling like you're messing up or learning something new and doing again. It's chop wood, carry water every day.
Yeah.
And I think if we all just got that message and owned it, then we might stop saying, you know what you should do? Like anything that starts with that sentence, it's like run away or just like flee. Like no one's gonna give you any good advice when they say, you know what you should do? Like you need to see that, you need to watch this video or read this book. There's no fix for this stuff. No one knows what you should do. All they could do is listen and maybe ask some really smart questions. But yeah, I mean, not everyone needs a fix. Sometimes you just need to be heard and acknowledged. I feel like it's really hard to heal without feeling a sense of acknowledgement that what you're going through is really hard.
Maybe we need, maybe our language is somewhat restricted. And one thing that made me realize this is reading the section on other languages that have words connected.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Can you remember what, sorry to put you on the spot, your
like,
book.
Recall.
Yeah. Can you remember what the German word Kummerspeck means?
Oh, I mean, of course, because it's like the smartest word ever. It's Kummerspeck means, I think it literally translates as grief bacon, which, God, man, Germans, like you have a word for everything, you know? And it like alludes to technically like the weight that you put on from emotional eating. Now, I adapt that to grief. The grief experience is like whatever your body does, which it's going to do so many different things. I mean, your body basically turns into, you feel like a marionette, you know? Like I remember I just like automatically overnight dropped like 15 pounds, like 8 stones. Did you like, I did that in my head just now. When my mom died, because I was so stressed, I couldn't eat, and it felt like overnight I became emaciated. And it didn't matter what I was eating, what I was putting in my body.
Wow.
My body just couldn't handle food, like it was just burning probably from stress. But then there were like months where it didn't matter what I was doing kindly to my body, I was holding on to weight. Wow. And it's just like, that's what I, like and we have a whole section on modernloss.com, which is called Grief Bacon. And it's a whole series on grief and the body. And because we're trying to show that, we're just trying to like expand the definition, the idea of grief bacon, which is like, you know, it's a 360 experience, you know, it's really, it's everything. It's how you breathe, it's your headaches, it's how can you sleep. And people think that, oh, something is wrong with me. Like I must have a brain tumor because I'm having vertigo, which I literally had a brain MRI 6 months after my mom died. Because I thought, I'm like, oh, I'm dizzy. Ergo, I must have a brain tumor. That was like the only idea I had. And the doctor was smart enough that his 6th question to me was, well, has anything notable happened in your life recently? And I was like, well, work is really stressful. And like my rent just went up. My mom was killed in a car accident. And he's like, let's go to the 3rd one. And that was really helpful for me because he was like, A, you don't have a brain tumor. And B, this is grief, you know? And that was very, very educational for me because it made, all of a sudden, like everything that my body had been going through made sense. And the result was in me being kind of more self-compassionate.
Yeah, and you reiterate this time and time again in the book that the body response, you know, grief is a bodily response. It's a full body response.
It is.
And I strongly concur with that.
Can I share one more phrase that I really love?
Well, I was going to, go on.
No,
go on.
No, surprise me.
Well, I thought if you can remember the full definition of arigata mewaku.
I knew I liked you. I was going to use that one. Okay, so I read this. I wrote this book in like the deepest depths of the first COVID-19 winter, which was just anything but a joyful time in the world. And in the United States, it was right after a very stressful election and during the January 6th, you know, Michigas. And I was looking for other cultures who had words that resonated with me. And I found arigato meiwaku, which is a Japanese term for, I was like, this is the smartest term I've ever heard, for when somebody does something that's like seemingly nice for you, but then they get really annoyed when you don't actively appreciate what they did and go out of their way to thank them and acknowledge them, and then they get super annoyed with you, and then they like won't talk to you or something. And it's basically like, I'm like, oh my God, that has happened to me so many times. Like the person who just was passive aggressive to me after she, you know, sent over all of these edible arrangements, which for a UK audience, I don't know if you have them.
What is an edible?
Pete, an edible arrangement is a bouquet of flowers that are whittled out of fruit pieces.
Oh, yes.
And sometimes have a marshmallow at the center and are frequently sent during milestone events such as graduations and death.
Sure.
So I got many of those in my one-bedroom apartment. 14, I counted them. The week after my mom died, I lived in a very small apartment in New York City. And I remember one girl was like, 10 days later or so, she's like, so did you get the edible arrangement? And I was like, I guess. Like, I didn't even know when.
Stuff comes in really quickly.
I didn't even know what time of day it was. And I remember she really stood on ceremony with me, and she just so badly wanted to be acknowledged for the edible arrangement she sent me. And I didn't hear from her for a little while, or, you know, I have heard from Modern Loss community members that like someone's like, oh, I'm gonna do like a meal train for this person, which is wonderful. It's when you set up like who's gonna send meals in the time ensuing after a loss, which it's an amazing community thing. It's a real mitzvah, it's a good deed, but you shouldn't do anything for someone who's grieving thinking that you're gonna get thanks for it or that you're gonna get a medal for it. You need to treat this person as though they're in the most vulnerable possible time a human can be in, and they get like a get out of jail free card emotionally for anything that you do for them.
Yeah.
So arigato meiwaku made a lot of sense to me because I'm like, yeah, people do this.
Are you still in touch with that person?
You know what? I am. I will say, you know, I know we were talking about how friendships are affected in loss, and there are some people who just kind of faded away.
Yeah.
There were some people who were really good friends of mine who I don't think were great supports, and I'm really grateful to say that they are dear, dear friends now. I just kind of moved through enough loss where I could get to the point where I could recognize that they also had their lives going on. Like they were doing their medical residencies or having their first baby. They were in their own state of overwhelm, and they couldn't naturally intuit everything that I needed. You know, it wasn't all about me, you know, but it really took time. And it took me kind of backing off from each other for a little bit, being like, you know, this person isn't making me feel good because they're not supporting me. I'm not hearing from them. It doesn't make me feel good. I'm going to draw a boundary. But what was really nice is that I got to a point where I could say, you know, I think this is worth saving. Like, can we just have a conversation? But yeah, edible arrangements girl and I, we're still good acquaintances.
That's good. I'm very happy to hear that.
She did send me an edible arrangement, so questionable choices.
Absolutely, absolutely. As you know, it's probably, I know Americans retain an intense fascination with our royal family. And so as a nation, we've been processing a certain amount of grief over here. And, you know, it's really thrown up a lot of interesting sort of discussion points. You know, what do you do as a nation when someone who's been in public life for so long, you know, passes away? How do you think we're doing?
Oh my gosh. Well, don't quote me on this in a public sphere. You guys are doing great. Good job. Good job with the grief.
Okay,
you
now
know.
what do you really think?
But no, I mean, I would say, you know, first, I'm not British, so I can't pretend to understand that connection to a monarchy. You know, I'm like a Jewish American whose family like came from the shtetl in Ukraine and Lithuania and were barley farmers probably. So I don't really have any like emotional attachment to a Commonwealth monarchy. That said, you know, I would say that a lot of us Americans, and particularly people who are grieving or working grief, were watching the proceedings and the pomp and circumstance on TV, and we were like, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot going on over there. Like there was like CNN had like 24/7 of the line.
Did they have it on CNN too?
It was just, you know, it was all the time. And I thought that it was fascinating first because like it was the United States, and we're just like, we were just like, you know, people are fascinated, like you said, with the monarchy. But a few things came to light. First, I was thinking, well, you don't necessarily have to, it's not necessarily a reflection of how you feel about the Queen. You know, I think that you can just kind of compare it to any time a public figure dies when you find yourself like oddly affected by it. So for example, just to make a comparison, like when Kobe Bryant died or when David Bowie died, I mean, I got a David Bowie manicure when he died. When Prince died, I dragged my husband to watch Purple Rain at a drive-in because I was so upset. And it's not because, oh, I just love their music, which I do, but it's because I was thinking about the role they played in my life, you know, and so by extension, I was thinking about my own memories and who was there when those memories happened. And so I was, you know, thinking, not all this hoopla about the Queen. Yes, I understand, like, you know, on a national identity level that you're pensive, and I get that, and I won't even pretend to, you know, dissect that, but I do think that there's something to be said for when a public figure dies, we shouldn't necessarily question if it feels like it's affecting us personally, because it's probably for very personal reasons. And you need to think about what those reasons are, and maybe you should talk about them with somebody.
Yeah, I think David Bowie, I think a lot of, you know, I certainly, you know, I was just taken aback by my own response to David Bowie's death, because it just, and I think you're right. I think there is a sort of, you know, you're accepting that you're kind of getting closer to mortality as well, and you know, you're saying you can never get that part of your life back. You know, where David Bowie was a sort of maybe a very a sort of catalyst, you know, for a lot of things.
Yeah, but I will say that like there is, I think that sometimes grief can look performative a little bit. And I was watching and seeing like, oh, you can't ride a bicycle in London because. Well,
there was certain things. There was a kind
mourning,
of there was a photograph that went viral of because there were all sorts of things that. There was definitely a certain amount of grief policing, and we'll come to that. Grief policing is a whole other thing.
Oh, that's a whole thing.
Yeah, and so there were all sorts of things you were deemed inappropriate to do.
Right.
And someone took a photograph of a bicycle stand, I think in Bristol, I'm not sure, which had a little piece of paper stuck on it saying, "On the day of the Queen's funeral, this bicycle stand
that's what I saw.
Cannot be used."
Right.
So that was kind of odd.
So, you know, again, like not trying to negate, like I do believe, I was like, that is a lot of great, you know, and there were a lot of tweets going around saying, like, just imagine that you got to lose your mom when you were 75, you know, and just all the, and you know, and I get that. I also get that everybody's grief is their own, you know, so it has to be acknowledged and respected and examined. But talking about like a public figure, chances are if you're really affected by it, it's because of your own personal life and whatever connection points exist there.
Yeah. What's the David Bowie manicure?
Oh, well, so at the time I was living in Austin, Texas for 6 months many years ago. This was 2016, right, when David Bowie died. And I was so bereft. And also I was writing my first book, so I was doing a lot of grief writing. And there was this woman that I followed on Instagram, and her Instagram handle was Nails Y'all. And I was like, her work is phenomenal. Like I wasn't a nail art person, I'm a nail biter. I played violin for 16 years, so like when I was a kid, so like my teacher was like, you know, always like hit me. She's like, you have to have short nails. So I just naturally became a nail biter as a neurotic Jew. But I'm like, well, the best way to not bite my nails is to get manicures. And so I found this nail artist, and she was doing whatever you wanted. And so I emailed her and I was like, I would like a David Bowie nail art, please. And she's like, great. And so she gave me like the Ziggy Stardust.
The flash. The lightning
bolt. And if you see actually right here, I have it in my
Amazing.
ear.
Wow.
Yeah.
God.
So, you know, to me, he's like the emblem of endless inspiration and
Absolutely.
self-exploration.
Absolutely,
So.
yes. I just wanted to touch on a couple of other things. Well, first of all, some of the characters that you seem to have attracted in the modern loss community, it's just some fantastic people. I was thinking about, I don't know, I better know where to start, but I will start with Joey Chernila, have I pronounced that correctly?
Joey Chernila, yeah.
Right.
Great guy.
And the Amazon alter ego of his Aunt Esther. Yeah. And what I love about this, it sort of touches, obviously, when people die these days, they leave a sort of digital legacy or a kind of online legacy. So often we can keep getting to know them. We discover facets of their personalities that might have been hidden from us. And Joey's Aunt Esther is a very good example of that, right?
Yeah, so, you know, Modern Loss really is like, it's not like about Rebecca or about Gabby. It's not about the people who co-founded the publication or have grown the community. It's about a community that's grown out of that. And it's like, who cares about just my story? I'm just one person. It's about giving others a platform to share their own experiences. And the entire tenet of Modern Loss is that storytelling is a change agent. And if you storytell that in ways that are vulnerable and raw and real and without any scruples, that is how you can affect change at a cultural level. Because you're really showing someone what it is like to go through what you're going through, instead of letting them keep on assuming that it takes a year, or they're in a better place, or you can always get pregnant again.
Yeah.
Okay, but what does it really feel like for me? And so we really encourage people to share their stories, because by doing so, they teach us. By teaching us, we become more empathic. And then when we become more empathic, we help the next person who's going through it, and so on and so forth, and that's the ripple effect. And so one of the examples of these stories, we've run thousands of pieces on our website, and we put it in the book, is, what's the name of
she has a pseudonym, right?
Aunt Esther. Joey's Aunt Esther died. And everyone thought that she was this total curmudgeon, right? And like she like never talked to anyone, and they thought that probably she was just really off-putting, and like, so, you know, just like we all have that older relative who's like, oh, we don't really think about them that much, you know, and then maybe they pass away and we're like, oh, that's a shame. But like we never really sit and think, who were they? You know, like they were still a person. Yeah. And so he writes this piece, and it's a weirdly delightful, I mean, it's a delightful read, you know, and he was tasked with emptying Aunt Esther's apartment in Flushing, Queens in New York City. And he goes to open the door and he finds like hundreds of Amazon boxes. And he's like, what? And he starts going through them, and then he goes online, and in his like investigative, like citizen investigative journalism, you know, role, he finds that Aunt Esther was a very active Amazon reviewer and had a pseudonym, Patricia.
Yes.
She went by Patricia, and she reviewed everything from like a can of unicorn Spam, which, please, I have no idea what that is, but you can buy it on Amazon and on Amazon Prime. It would arrive probably tomorrow. To like Nietzsche, like she reviewed everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And the reviews were so colorful. And he said he was just sitting there reading these reviews, and he's like, it was like a portal into her soul.
Yeah.
Like I really got to know her through these reviews, through how these products were like affecting her and her opinion. And he's kind of like the end, you know, the moral or the takeaway was like, I wish I had known more.
Yeah.
And that to me was very moving. And it's a really funny piece, you know? I mean, it's about like a functional hoarder, but it's just a sliver to show that like when we storytell, you just never know. You never know what you're gonna learn about somebody.
Because you do keep getting to know someone. You keep getting to know someone after they've died in two ways, I think. First of all, because of the thing in that kind of sense, when sort of, you know, a cache of letters that they might have left behind. Yeah. Someone, a friend of your mother's, forwarded a bunch of their email correspondence to you, didn't they?
Yeah, I got my mom's dental hygienist Karen, who's like the nicest person, and I didn't know Karen until she emailed me, and she sent all of these wonderful anecdotes about my mom, and I would have never otherwise known them had she not chosen to share them. And for me, it was really amazing because there are extreme limitations to the new things I'm going to learn about my mom at this point. She's not here anymore to tell me. I mean, luckily we were very close. I can frequently imagine what her reaction would be to something, what her advice would be, but there are times when I really don't know because she's been gone for so long and she hasn't seen me in roles like parent or like married person. She just hasn't seen me in roles like that, so I don't know what she would say. But getting these stories from other people it's a real gift, and because it just is kind of proof that the relationship lives on. And I think that's something that I wish that more people would realize when they are faced with grief, not in a Pollyanna way, like, oh, the relationship's still alive, like, don't worry, no, it sucks, it's awful, like, they're not here, it's awful. But from everything we've known, we can't, like, turn back the clock. And so we're faced with, what do we do now? Like, you're standing in the rubble and you're, like, wondering what we do now. And one of the things that I wish people would just somehow kind of remember is that you do still have a relationship with the person who died. And it might be a one-sided relationship, but there are things to learn. There are anecdotes you can find out by asking people to share with you that you might not otherwise know. There are different ways by which you're going to regard them as you move through your life.
Well, as a mother to your children, I'm sure there must be moments where you're sort of comparing experiences you're going through right now with your children and sort of thinking, oh, well, my mother would have done this. This is like, and that gives you, and you wouldn't necessarily have known or been able to kind of think yourself in your mother's position before you had children. But here you are now, and you're sort of getting a sort of a flavour of, you're seeing her in that light, which you might not necessarily have
You're
done before.
totally right. I mean, that's a great thing that you just pointed out, is that I view her more, I regard her more now, not as like a 30-year-old, like, let's say girl, okay, 30. That's like in New York years, that's like zygote age in New York. You're so immature. But a 30-year-old, childless, not married, I was just starting out. I felt very like new, very green. And with my mom, it was very much like she's my mom, that's my mom. And now time has gone by and I regard her not just as my mom, but as a fellow mother, as a woman who started her own business, who probably struggled with that balance of like family and work, thinking about like what she would have done, how she would have managed things, like moving through life, getting a little older. How did she manage these feelings of like, oh God, I'm not like 23 anymore, and it's very interesting. And what I've noticed about me is that I have more empathy for her now than I did when I was 30.
Absolutely.
It's not that I was like a total snot. It's just that I didn't have that depth, that long view. And I feel very, again, I wish she were here. That's like, I hope that's clear. But she's not. And I feel very, very, I think it's a really beautiful thing that I can think of her in such a nuanced, layered way now, because I thought it was kind of all over when she died. I'm like, that's it. I guess like that's where it ends.
One of my, suddenly, in ways I could never have predicted, one of my most treasured possessions now is my dad was dragged kicking and screaming into the digital age, sort of protesting all the way. And he had a first generation iPhone. The phone he had when he died was a first generation iPhone. And he and the way he managed the sort of information overload in his life via his phone was that anything he needed to remember, he would create an entry for it in the phone book app of his phone. So it wasn't just phone numbers that were in there. Anything, and it was actually quite a good system because you could scroll down alphabetically. And so there were things like, but actually it was quite heartbreaking. It was, you saw the sort of degree to which even though so much of the modern world confused him, he somehow found a way to sort of, through this phone, to sort of order it in a way which just about worked for him. So he'd put sort of entries for where he put the kind of bank account numbers of my daughters, his granddaughters, so that, you know, special occasions when he needed to send money to them, then he could sort of use that information. And he was obsessed with, you know, the way he used to show me love, essentially, was by every time I drove, he was obsessed with cars. So he would change the oil in the car after a certain amount of miles. And so there were separate phone entries in his book for every single oil change that he'd made, so that he knew when, with the date of it, so that he knew when to change it next.
It's really sweet.
And so just these sort of artifacts which suddenly become priceless.
Totally. Mine would be, my mom. I went through a really hard time, as we all do, and you know, in our 20s. I think, I don't know, it was who knows what. I'm an emotional Jewess from the Upper West Side. It was a Tuesday. I was having an emotional day. And I had a conversation with her, and I was like, I'm not doing great. I'm overwhelmed. I'm in grad school. I don't know what's going on. And she emailed me, and she said, I'm coming up tomorrow, because I'm from Philadelphia, which is just like an hour-and-a-half train ride from New York City. And she said, I'm coming from Philly. I'm bringing baked chicken. And I'm at JW3, so you all know how comforting that is. And I'm like, amazing, like mom's coming, she's bringing baked chicken. And she brought me baked chicken. It was her apricot chicken, and to this day, I don't have the recipe. I have no idea how the hell to make this. I tried to make it over Rosh Hashanah, and it tasted like 53% like it. And like every year, it's like my ritual of like trying to get this thing right, and I can't find the recipe for the life of me. But she brought up her baked chicken, and I put the leftover in my freezer, and this was in 2005 when I was in grad school at Columbia Journalism School. She died in 2006, and I was looking in my freezer, and I looked back and I pulled this Ziploc bag out, and she had written on it, "Mom's baked chicken." And I just lost it. I mean, I just lost it. First of all, I'm such a disaster that clearly I still had chicken in a freezer from like a year and a half. That shows how organized I am. But thank goodness I'm such a mess, because I found that. And the things we hold on to, right? Like I found myself, most normal humans would be like, oh, that's gross. Like we should dispose of that. My visceral reaction was to take a scissors and cut out the label on the Ziploc bag that had that, and put it on my fridge with a magnet, because to me that embodied everything. That embodied motherly love, unconditional love, care, you know, and I love those things. And, you know, just like your dad's phone, it's such a wonderful story. Like if we only shared these things, it would make us feel so much closer to each other, and make us realize how universal this whole thing is, you know, and, you know, it's frequently not in the things, it's not in like, oh, it's in this like generations old Bible that's been handed down from, you know, like it's in like the Ziploc bag, you know, or the iPhone, or these boots.
These boots are your mother's, aren't they?
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yeah, these were hers. She had like the skinniest calves. I had to get these like zipper like extended. She bought these in Italy, in Florence in the 70s. Wow. And I'm actually going to Italy for an event after this, and I brought them because it makes me feel really awesome to have her with me.
I hope you're the same shoe size and you're not in terrible pain right now.
No, I mean, I'm good. No, they're so cute, right? She really had style. She also had a lot of like bright ponchos. She lived in the Haight-Ashbury in the 60s. So she pulled off a lot that like I just don't have the confidence for. So I'm just grateful when I have these like one-off pieces that I feel like,
they are,
you know.
Demon boots. Perhaps my favorite quote in the Modern Loss Handbook, it's a very short one. You can't fuck with a crab. Would you like to explain?
You can't. Yeah, sure. I didn't know you couldn't until I started writing for this book. So there's a whole section at the beginning of the book, and I think it's called like a guiding principle for how to use this book. And I should say for context that it is an interactive book. It's not a workbook or a journal. It's a fully written book, but that has sections where you can write in it and try things out and mess up or like see how you've grown as time goes by. And there are 3 goals. It's to help you stay connected to yourself, stay connected to your person, and stay connected to the world around you through lots of things like exploring ritual, exploring memory, or the what could have beens or what should have beens, exploring really hard things, you know, facing really hard things that you might not want to think about or remember, but I argue are as important, if not more important, than remembering the mom's baked chicken. Talking about navigating friendship and work life. But at the beginning of the book, I write, you know, before you dive in, I want you to kind of reframe how you approach thinking about grief and hard things, because we really love these metaphors of like, they fought that battle, like, you know, they fought that battle with cancer and they valiantly fought and lost. You know, it's like, no, they didn't. Like, yeah, they fought, yeah, sure, but they didn't lose. They just died. Like, it's a disease. It's cells. They're dividing faster than you can stop them from dividing. That's not like a strength thing. That's just luck of the draw, in my opinion. People can have the same treatment and like one cannot make it and the other can. And so what's that to say of the person who didn't make it? Are they less strong? Did they fight less than the other person? And so I argue that like instead of thinking about stuff like war metaphors, you know, like Desert Storm, let's talk about it through the lens of, you know, flexibility, right? And like wonkiness. And so, yeah, crabs. I know now so many things about crabs, and I say, I want you to think like a crab because crabs are the most resilient animals on Earth, and for many different reasons. But mostly, like, they're resilient, they're flexible. They lose a limb, sometimes they even grow it back, and they're super wonky, and they pivot whenever they need to. They can walk like backwards and forwards and sideways, diagonal, and their only job in the ocean is to just hold on to the bottom in shifting sand, you know, whichever way the water, the current is going, and just try and like get some footing, even if they look literally crazy while they're doing it. And so that's why I say, like, think more like a crab, because they just get shit done. Like, they don't care if they look weird. You can't fuck with a crab. You can't, because their only job is to get their shit done. And that's what your job is in grief. Just move through it. And sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1,000 steps back, and that is normal.
I don't think I can ever eat a crab again.
I know, and I just had like a California roll in the green room, but I think it was like the fake crab.
Yeah, I don't think that,
Because
it's a kind of,
I have a real deep respect for crabs right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca, thank you so much. It's this book and actually the book before it as well, the writing anthology, and the whole online community it's led me to has just been fantastic. It's come at the right time. It's been a pleasure to meet you, an absolute joy to meet you, and I hope that you're able to answer a few questions if our co-travelers.
I would love to. I'm wondering, are we going to do a 6-word memoir?
Oh, what, sorry?
Are we going to do the 6-word memoir?
The 6-word memoir.
Yeah.
The 6-word memoir.
Have some fun.
This is. Tell me about this. I love the 6-word memoir, and I've actually spent half the evening prior to the beginning of this trying to figure out what mine was. So, explain the concept of the 6-word memoir.
So we're going to do Q&A. So think of the questions because I'd love to answer them. But also, we thought that maybe we would do an audience participation, and I believe that Rose and McKella are passing out pens and paper, and I would just love, Modern Loss is about community, and it's about having people share their story, not just like me talking at you and sharing my story. And so we want to hear a little bit of what you're going through. And the reason that I love 6-word memoirs are because they're really like hands-off. It's a 6-word, Ernest Hemingway had this short story, and I think it was For Sale, Girl Shoes, Never Worn. And you're like, what happened? You're like, wait, did she outgrow them really quickly? Or like, did she die? Like, it could be something super innocuous, like they were lost, or, she was murdered. I mean, there are just so many different ways that this story could go. But what it does is it creates intrigue but it doesn't share too much. And so a fellow rebooter, whose name is Larry Smith, really promotes this storytelling method, which I really love, because it's just 6-word storytelling. It's coming up with your experience in 6 words, enough that it creates some intrigue and some curiosity from the people who are listening to it, and makes them want to learn more, makes them want to ask you about your experience, or maybe they see a little bit of your experience, their experience in what you're saying, they want to go up to. Maybe after that, you get in a conversation. Who knows? Maybe you even go out for a drink, create community. It's a really democratic way of storytelling, because anybody can come up with 6 words. And with grief, which is a very overwhelming topic to tell people to share about, I'm not asking you to write the year of magical thinking. I'm asking you to write 6 words on loss of any kind, because we are in year 3 of a pandemic where we've had all sorts of loss, identity loss and loss of go-to coping mechanisms, loss of an ability to celebrate with each other easily in person, mourn with each other. And so we're gonna do Q&As, but your homework right now is to spend a few minutes writing your 6-word memoir, and we will give you like a cheat sheet. We're gonna share 2 of ours, right?
Having heard you talk about the criteria of what your 6-word memoir is supposed to do, I've just realised mine's a bit rubbish. But mine
It wasn't rubbish at
mine
all.
explains too much. Mine doesn't leave. Mine's not intriguing enough. But of course,
I was intrigued.
Oh, were you?
Yeah,
Okay. Well,
it
thank you.
made
What's
me
yours?
hungry. See, now you have to share it because everyone's intrigued by what it was. Mine would be this one's for my parents. I'm raising them Jewish. You're welcome.
That's,
So.
see, yours has got gravitas, really.
And a little attitude.
Yeah, true. Okay. Well, shall I give you a bit more time by sharing mine, which is kind of, there's no...
It's not, oh my gosh. Okay,
Sorry?
you are being way too self-critical here.
Well, that's another... mine is everything was better in a sandwich, because that really is the story of my life. It was... there's nothing that I haven't been able to improve by that's edible by not putting it between 2 slices of bread. So there we are.
Some examples, and we can move to Q&A in a minute, are, I've done live storytelling events and people have stood up and said things like, she never got to see Paris, or 10 years on, still really hard, or never met you but love you. It was one woman who had a miscarriage, and so there are just so many different things to express. But yeah, please think and do share. It would be really, you should see what happens when you do.
Yeah, I'm still thinking of more. I'm still thinking.
I know, it's the counting.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Anyway, so while we're giving people time to write, do we take questions?
Yeah, let's do it, yeah.
Does anyone have, this gentleman over here?
Thank you as well for the engaging discussion. My name's Josh. I was thinking about, I'd be just curious about any insights from the modern loss community, or your experiences when the person who you've lost is the dynamic's been estranged or strained or maybe even harmful, and where the pitfalls or blind spots are within common scripts and rituals with grief.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you're talking about like personal experience, like a direct loss of somebody who has been harmful, or how to support somebody who has had that kind of loss?
I guess I'm thinking generally that phenomenon.
Yeah, I think that it's really important that people just remember that we're all human, and that by extension we're fallible, and we mess up, and we hurt people, and we do a lot of wrong things, and we can be really destructive in others' lives. And so not everybody's loss is one that is of a relationship that was completely harmonious and love. I mean, nothing is 100%, life is messy, relationships are messy, but some relationships are very harmful, and there's a lot of trauma that has been inflicted. And then when one person dies, the survivor is the only one left to carry that burden. And that's an overwhelming insult to injury, because now you can never directly confront the person again. If you're in therapy, you're just never gonna have any like direct confrontation. And I think that it's really, we hear from a lot of people who have been victims of abuse. You know, a woman wrote for us who, her husband was 30, died in a scuba diving accident, and she found out he was having affairs with multiple women. And so she was like, how do I deal with this? Because I'm so angry, and I'm mourning him, and I want to confront him. And I think a lot of it is like, you know, I'm a huge believer in grief counseling, I mean, I'm also a believer in community and talking about it. I don't think that grief is a pathology. I don't think it can only be talked about with a psychologist or a social worker. I think that it needs to be talked about in community, and the more that we can be open about the fact that not every relationship is a positive one, and some are overwhelmingly negative, and also, you know, people really do need to go to the right counselor to talk about this and not say, well, that's done, they're dead, I guess that's it. Much in the way that I keep saying, I regard my mom differently now as time goes by. Like, I still have a very active relationship with her. That person still has an active relationship with the person who caused them harm, and it needs to be dealt with, you know? And it frequently can be very helpfully dealt with through the right counseling. But I think it's just, we just have to remember that not everybody is so sorry for their loss, right? And that's okay to say out loud.
I remember a very tangential point, really, but I remember there's a well-known Scottish singer-songwriter called John Martin who died a few years ago, and who, you know, by all accounts was, shall we say, a very complex man who in his relationships with a lot of people left a lot of sort of damage behind. And but obviously fanatically revered by many people for the wonderful songs that he wrote. And one thing I've noticed over the years is when someone who's quite difficult to be around dies, you know, often people say they were a larger than life character. And they also say that about people who were physically very big as well, because it's a polite way of sort of addressing that. John Martin was both, so a lot of people said he was a larger than life character all the time, because it could seem to tick both of those boxes. But yeah, these strange euphemisms that we have.
Right. And it's like we're not really helping a lot of people, right? It's like we're so scared to like not put the dead on a pedestal that we're doing a disservice to the people who are still here. And we're not helping them contend with very real things and get to a point of healing, you know?
Yeah, maybe like you shouldn't be, the day after they die, maybe that's not the time to sort of have a frank kind of sort of, discussion about.
Remember that thing they did that destroyed you? Right.
Yeah.
Like,
But, you know, some way down the line, of course.
Yeah. I think it's really, I think it's something that just like with anything, like brushing anything under the rug, you know, there's a whole section on the grief, the mind-body grief continuum, and the germane thought here is that the subtitle of the chapter is you can fool everybody but yourself, you know? Like you can, you have to deal with the hard things. And like in the first section, there's a chapter on memory, and I challenge people to like, it's like, yes, I'm asking you like, what was their biggest quirk? Like, what was their favorite weird joke? You know, but then I'm like, is there ever a time when they didn't apologize to you? Is there ever anything that they said that physically hurt or that hurt you? Are there any resentments? You know, because that stuff really is even more important to tease out of you.
It's interesting. It's amazing to think that, you know, ultimately every copy of this book that is owned by someone will be unique. They will all be unique artifacts that relate to the loss of that person in their life.
It's true.
So that's incredible. Would anyone else like to?
Any other questions?
Hello.
Hi.
Tying together the mind and the body almost, because the body has a response to music that sometimes is beyond what the mind is necessarily ready to articulate. So I just wanted for both of you, and I know that both traditions and also artists that really mean a lot to you. I wondered what role music played for you in grief.
That's a great question. Pete?
I certainly in recent, I wrote a piece a few months ago for the New Statesman about the way I found that I'd sort of started to process music in the wake of my father's death, which I realised happened almost instantly in ways that I barely understood from the get-go. And part of that was that when I got the phone call to say what had happened, it was midnight, sort of on Saturday going into Sunday, and you sort of know when you get a call from your parents' landline at that time, you kind of know what it is, and so it was almost like I'd rehearsed it in my head, several times before, and within minutes I'd packed a case and I was heading into the car and on the road, and I remember sort of thinking, I don't want silence. I can't really deal with silence right now, so I'll put the radio on and just see what's. And the only thing I could find was a program hosted by Animatronic, who used to be in the Scissor Sisters, and it was a celebration of the golden age of Studio 54. And I remember, so all this kind of euphoric disco music was playing, and I said, this is kind of weird, but I don't not want this to be playing. I don't want silence, and so I just had this. Do you know a version of the song "Don't Let Me Be Understood" by Santa Esmeralda, which is a kind of sort of euphoric flamenco disco kind of epic? And in a way, it felt appropriate because Greeks are quite sort of melodramatic people, and the same part of me that loves Pedro Almodovar, where the way music is used in Almodovar films. I realised that it was almost like I was in a scene from a film. Further down the line, in terms of what I thought songs that were maybe about someone dying would move me, but what I found it tended to be the case was a song which just really sort of affirms the goodness of people, or the goodness or the importance of love in a non-specific context would just suddenly floor me. And I remember we were at Glastonbury, and we went to see Elbow do their set. And I thought I'd heard One Day Like This far too many times to be really that moved by it anymore. But it just sort of hit me like a sledgehammer. It was absolutely, and it was just about, Elbow are particularly good at just sort of zoning in on the humanity between two people in little moments. And that's what completely just floors me personally.
I can't believe you just said Elbow, because One Day Like This destroys me.
Yeah.
I can't believe you said that. And that's like for an American to know that song. I mean, that song.
Yeah, I was
ends
surprised.
me.
I didn't realise that anyone in America knew that song, because I didn't know.
I'm the American who knows that song. It's a beautiful song,
Yeah.
and it also ends me. For me, I could not, I think I mentioned earlier, I played classical violin for 16, 17 years, starting when I was 5. I couldn't listen to music for almost a year after my mom died. I literally couldn't listen to it. I always have music on. This is one of the reasons I was so excited that Pete was going to do this with me tonight. It felt like overwhelming to my senses, which is interesting because I also never wanted to be alone. I always wanted to be moving, going. But music was too much. Like I couldn't handle it, and I couldn't handle like super happy stuff. Like I wanted to scream at it. And then anything really emotional, I was scared I would just lose myself and never come back. Because I'm also a highly sensitive person. I absorb, I absorb things. I absorb musical feelings. I absorb the emotions very deeply. And then, but music plays it always has in general. But, I just remember the night my dad died listening to You're the Top by Cole Porter on repeat. Probably like 3 dozen times. because my dad taught me to love Cole Porter. I love Cole Porter. If I could be any lyricist, it would be he, the best of all time. And I just kept listening to it, and it was just this, musical metaphor for my dad's wit, his love of music, but also just, the regard of someone who just loves you and sees you through rose-colored lenses no matter what, just thinks you're the bee's knees. And it was a really powerful moment. That was my ritual that night. I have many other musical rituals, and there's a whole section in the book that actually teases out playlists from you. But yeah, that's a really good question.
Do you have one?
Do I have one?
Or does it, and indeed, is it?
Yeah. Well, my 6-word story is I see you on every dance floor, because my cousin, it will be 10 years since he died, on the 10th of November, 2nd November, 10 years. He was 27 when he died, and we used to go to see Balkan beatbox and a lot of the klezmer kind of bands, and we would just let rip. And he's Turkish, and he came to live here in London. So for me, every time I dance to that kind of music at a wedding, whatever, he's right there. He's right there.
Oh, man.
Sometimes I have to leave the dance floor and go have a cry in the toilet and then come right back.
But also dancing is obviously a cathartic release as well, So, does anyone else have one? A song that springs to mind? That gentleman over there.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Danny. This is an old friend of my dad's. Is it me? Is it? It's the what? Oh, yeah. Seriously.
Anyway, my question really is, you mentioned the age difference between them, and you talked about your mom a lot. I had a similar situation where my father had a 20-year difference in his partner, and she died before him at the age of 65, and he was 85. How did your dad take the loss, which was so sudden?
Well, the circumstances were tough because my dad was in the car accident with my mom. So just on a direct, level, he watched her die. So that was really terrible and traumatizing. And second, if you knew my parents, you knew my mom. She was just so full of light. She was so incredible. She was everyone's cheerleader. And to have that light just completely snuffed out from one nanosecond to the next for my dad, I think that he was full of vim and vigor, and she just made him even more so. He had gotten it wrong for his first 2 marriages, and then he really got it right with her, and for 35 years. So to have that disappear, I think, and for him to still be someone who had all that energy, who still wanted to experience the world, who wanted to work, who wanted to travel, who wanted to go see, Pirates of Penzance and go to the Philadelphia Orchestra and use his seasonal tickets, to not have his partner in crime to do that with was just so excruciating. And also, I just remember him saying that, he wasn't really there for me after she died. He was mostly, I think, there for himself and trying to kind of keep his head above water. And it made me feel very alone. And I'd wake up in the morning sometimes, and there would be emails from him, and he would be dumping on me all these memories from the night of the accident or any other memory of my mom. And one day I had to say to him, I can't handle this because I have to go to my comedy job, and I'm reading this, and I have to go make fun of politicians in an hour, and you're freaking me out. I'm trying to keep my act together. And I'm I just wish that you would share this stuff with me more at 3 p.m. hour, or maybe we can talk about it at brunch. And he said, I don't think I can do that, because if I open up too much, if I dive in too much, I'm scared I'll never come back. And so he would just have these moments where like he would just have to like vomit some stuff out, but he couldn't do that regularly because it was a real like survival instinct. Also, you know, I'll very much generalize. He was a man. He was an older man, you know? I mean, there is something to this, to cultural mores.
I was going to ask you earlier on if you generally noticed a sort of, you know, within the community of loss, if there's a sort of broad difference between the way men and women deal with loss.
I believe so, and I'll say that with the caveat that I think that we're in a time and age now where, you know, gender is not just like a binary thing, and there are so many different ways to self-identify. But if we're being highly stereotypical, yes, like, and you can read lots of pieces about this by therapists saying there are typical ways in which a male will grieve or, you know, like show depression and grief, and typical ways in which a female might, and, you know, in female, you might have a bit more of like a need to externalize, to be communal, to talk with friends, to like, you know, share. With men, you might have more of like, oh, a sudden interest in like fixing this thing every single day for 5 hours, or in like being angry, or in just like, you know, like losing yourself in like, you know, a band or like a TV show or a sport or something like that. A bit more of like, you know, like a distraction.
Yeah. Or a proxy.
A proxy, exactly. Yeah. And we have a piece on modernloss.com written by a male therapist, and it's called Dude, Where's My Grief? And it talks about this. It talks about how when his mom died when he was 18, he thought that he was only allowed to exhibit grief in like certain ways, but it wasn't helping him. And like, it was only like when he spoke to the right people that he realized that you don't have to go by like gender rules, like grief is grief, you know? But yeah, I mean, he really, you know, he survived, and he ended up, you know, living as best as he could, and he had a partner for a few years before he himself died, who he could travel with and go to shows with and see Gilbert and Sullivan. But, you know, he lost the love of his life. And I think that a certain joy, you know, was evidently just gone from him, and it was noticeable.
Man. Thank you, Rebecca. And I think that's as good a...
Anyone else want to share their 6-word memoir before we finish?
Yes.
No pressure. Yes.
The mic is not working again.
Oh, okay. I mean, can I swear?
What?
Too late for that now.
Yeah. Do whatever you...
I'm just going to say as well, I'm still working through a lot of my grief, so this represents how I feel and what goes through my head the whole time, so it might not be the most positive one. But it's a fucked up circle of life is basically mine.
It really is.
In the sense as well that I actually lost my dad, sorry, I'll cry now, in the pandemic, just before we went into the pandemic, he got diagnosed with a brain tumour, and about 4 weeks after his diagnosis, I found out I was pregnant.
Oh my God.
And 5 weeks after my daughter was born, he passed away. So that is my fucked up circle of life for that. And like you, I went through kind of losing my dad at a massively, you know, iconic landmark moment of my life. And I've had to navigate kind of learning to be a mum at the same time as going through this like profound grief. And like, I'm still working, you know, my daughter's 2 in December, and my dad's anniversary of my dad's death will be 2 years in January. And I'm still kind of like figuring all that out, and it's fucked up.
It is fucked up, and there's no need to apologize for sounding negative, because you can sound however you need to sound. I mean, you might be feeling positive 3 minutes from now for 60 seconds, and that's okay too. And first of all, I'm so sorry this happened to you, because it does sound messed up, you know? And I think that it shows that, like, I think people think that, like, there are these, like, you know, there are these times of loss, and there are these times, like that song, like, they're to every season. But, like, all the seasons are actually at the same time, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's a season of birth and death. It's a season of joy and sadness. Like, we can hold on to a lot of things at the same time, because that's what life is. It's not, like, compartmentalized experiences. And that is the rub. That is what we're not taught. We're not taught that, like, grief is one big shade of gray. We're taught that it should be black and white. It should be binary. It should be like you're over it or it's easier now, but it's really just like different hues. And sometimes the hues are lighter and sometimes they're darker because there is a lot of joy. You have a child and they're two, and I'm sure that brings you so much joy and also is exhausting and sad and infuriating and pisses you off that your dad isn't here. And also you lost him during a global pandemic, which must have been extra isolating. So I don't even understand the things you had to deal with that.
There's just a lot going on. I mean, yeah, it has been, the only way to describe it really is bittersweet.
Yeah.
Because, I go through, and I don't know what I would have done. But I don't know where I would have been if my daughter, in a way I was dreading, kind of when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, great. And I knew my dad's diagnosis was bleak. And I kind of like, in my head, like I was doing this like anticipatory grief, like grieving for like the whole time that he was here. And I was thinking, okay, but if he's got the length of his diagnosis, he'll be here till October. I mean, he lasted 9 months, but in my mind, I was like so dreading the moment that I knew that I'd have to do early motherhood and grief. And I knew it was going to come, and I knew she'd be either 6 months old or she'd be minutes old. And it, like, nothing can prepare you for that, but it's just, you do go through these like minutes of like, I don't know what I would have done without her, basically. I don't know where I would be if my daughter didn't come at that time. But it's everyone has their own journey in that way. So it's just, and I had a lot of people saying to me, at least your dad got to meet, and I know that some people don't ever have that opportunity, and it's just, but no,
doesn't mean it has to be easier for you.
It's
to be grateful for
it's just, Anyway, thank you so much as well for tonight.
It's so great. It's so great that you can talk about it and you can find the words to articulate it. And,
Yeah, it's hard, but I actually find talking. I mean, I talk about my dad to anyone who will listen. So he was my best friend, and I just literally will tell. My dad. Every time I get in a taxi, a black cab. My dad did advertising on black cabs. That's his job, and I have to tell the cab driver. And also my grandpa was also a black cab driver, so I always just have this connection, and I will tell anyone about their stories or his story. I'm very open, and I found pages like Instagram pages, the communities that come from those, just the most helpful thing, like going through it, because it is just so lonely, and just finding people that have that understanding and know exactly how shit is.
I think that something like just two quick things from that is like, first, the power of the internet. Like, I generally think it's going to bring us all down. Like 99% of me thinks like we're just done as a society because of the internet. But like 1% of me is like, that's like different accounts, and there are people in this very room who run amazing other accounts of grief communities. Modern Loss has Instagram. We're on all the social platforms, and it allows people to have very low-touch ways to feel like they're part of an ongoing invitation to commune with this stuff, to feel seen, to feel witnessed, to answer a prompt, and to feel like they're part of a community of people who get it, even if they never speak up. And that can be very powerful. And I think that's like the internet's one redeeming quality, in addition to like online reservation systems. When they work, when you can get a table. But, I think that I hope that you find more of those. And the other thing I will say, and it's just a little bit more tangential, but it is October, which is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month globally. The 15th was Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. And you talk about like, you were pregnant, you were grieving, and in addition, there are many people who can carry pregnancies and their partners who, are out there, and we need to do a better job of supporting them, because there are things that happen every single day that we don't like imagining, like stillbirth and miscarriage and, wanted children who need to be aborted for certain reasons, and, the birthing person's bodies might still be lactating or have to lose baby weight and all these other things. And there are these things, we just don't talk about it enough, and we just have to. We call it the unimaginable. And I wrote an entire essay about this for Time Magazine, which is like, it's highly imaginable. It's just, you don't want to imagine it.
We can try hard.
So you have to imagine it, because if not, you're just drawing a line in the sand and you're being like, that's yours. That's yours, and this is mine. That's yours. You go deal with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have? Should we hear some 6-word memoirs?
Hi.
Hi.
I write a lot of blogs, generally on Facebook. I do a lot of anecdotal stuff and restaurant reviews. And so my mum died in June. And I've been blogging a lot about grief. And no one's told me to shut up. It's the first time nobody's told me to shut up. And in fact, every time I write something, people message me privately, thanking me or talking about their situation. And that's really helped for me. I don't know if I'll get this out. I might have to hand it to my friend to read out. But we were in Israel in June on like the holiday of a lifetime. I was with my husband when we got the call to say that my mum had had a cardiac arrest, and we rushed back during the night. By the time we got to Leeds the next day, we missed her by an hour. So my 6-word thing, because she'd been the most brilliant mum. She was just so lovely. So my thing is, felt almost rude not saying goodbye. Because I just think she, out of everything, and then I just couldn't be there. And I'm not cross with myself because we rushed back and it wouldn't have made any difference. But it's just the irony of going, I'm 56 and we had that wonderful relationship. Then I just couldn't say goodbye. I mean, I'm thinking, is she thinking? And she wasn't there. I'm sure I know rationally that she wasn't, and I don't really give myself a hard time about it, but it's just tough.
I'm so sorry that happened. That sounds awful and excruciating. And it's clear that you love her so much. I mean, you said she was just the best. And I think that it's amazing that you've been blogging about it. And that literally proves that everyone has something to teach somebody else. Like, people ask me, they're like, how did you become a grief expert? And I'm like, I'm not. I'm just Rebecca. And like, I'm other things. I'm not a grief. You're a grief expert too. Like, do you have grief? You're an expert. What do I know? I just know me, my story. And so like, you have so much, not just when you're sharing your stories, right? And so you're feeling like this catharsis and you're sharing your narrative. You're not letting people wait to guess what you're going through. You're sharing it to the extent that you feel comfortable with the details that you feel comfortable sharing. But by extension, you're pulling other people out of their own isolation, because these messages you're getting are from people who desperately need an invitation to engage with it and feel seen. And it just shows, like anything, a post on Facebook, you have no idea what effect it's going to have.
Yeah, people will always need to tell their stories. But maybe won't be emboldened to do so unless someone else is telling their story, their unique story. And, all our stories are unique. That's the point as well.
We're all experts. We all, it's like, I mean, I think keep going,
Thank you for sharing as well. Thank you very much.
Yes. Hi.
Thank you. Hello, thank you so much. It's been really, really great to hear you both tonight. My 6-letter memoir comes off the back of a very intense week doing auntie duties to my 4-year-old nephew. To give context to my story, before I get into as to how it's got into my memoir, my mum died 6 years ago when I was 19, so a very sudden heart attack, and as you can imagine, just turned my life upside down. And my brother found out he was going to be a father coming up to a year after our mother's death, and it was just like, again, that whole paradox of life and birth, of just how are we going to bring and raise this baby in this world when we are in total and utter despair. And he was the beam and is the beam and joy of our life. But this week he wasn't really, as I looked after him. And it was always, as this little nephew was brought into my life, I thought, gosh, how will this boy know this woman, this great woman that was before him, that is part of him, is, our mother, his grandmother. And it used to keep me up at night. He's not even my child, but, how will we tell this boy about who is she? And my gosh, how she is like coursing through you and you don't even know it yet. And it was on the pickup on school this week, as we were talking about songs earlier, Whitney Houston came on my playlist, and Whitney Houston is just something between my mum, and we loved it, and just, beltering it when we could not sing at all. And I just went, oh, Leo, do you know who loves this song as well? And he said, who, Auntie? And I said, Nanny Sue. And then he just went quiet for a second. And then he went, so does she have her phone in the sky? And I said, and I took a beat and I went, okay. And I went, yeah, I think she does, you know. And he said, does she play her music up there too? I said, yeah, she does. She'll play Whitney up there. And so kind of reflecting on that week and kind of that fear of mine is so kind of gone now, of knowing that actually through storytelling, through even when they're so little, he understands that she's not here, but she is still here and she's around us and we can connect. And so my sixth letter is, you're still alive in the kids.
Oh, that's wonderful. And isn't that great? And it shows like it's like I'm tasked every day with figuring out like my kids have two grandparents who they'll never ever meet, my parents, and it never doesn't suck. Never, you know? It's dealable because you have to deal with it, but I always am like, how do I, you know, figure this out? How do I teach them and not do it where it's like they're rolling their eyes or whatever? And when they were babies, I would just tell them bedtime stories and just memories before they could even, they were baby, you know, I have a 5 and an 8-year-old. And when they were babies, I would just like be up all night long and I would just tell them stories about their grandparents because I was up, no one was with me. They didn't care, they couldn't escape. They had to listen. And I would just say memories. I would do like a free floating, like a free association memory, which for me was very helpful because when you're like grieving, a lot of times you're remembering like an illness or an accident or a goodbye or a what if or if only, you know, a moment of ending. And you're not necessarily like freed up to think about memories that might be other things that you want to hold on to and you're scared you're going to forget. That's how I was for many, you know, a long period of time after my mom died. And when my kids were babies, I was like, oh, I can remember things because I'm sitting here, I have nothing but time. And then as they got older, I actually turned my parents into superheroes and told like the weirdest memories I could ever remember with them and just made them superheroes. And so it was so fun for me because I had to come up with bedtime content. Like I was really going into like John Waters film territory plot lines, like John Cusack plot. I was like telling like the Better Off Dead plot line because I was like so out of material. And so I turned to my parents and I wasn't like, this is your Grandpa Bray. Because like, you know, sometimes they're like, Mom, but they're learning, you know. And I will say as your nephew gets older, my mom's birthday was last week. She would have been 80. Which is crazy to me because the last time I saw her, she was 63. And I took my kids out after school and I was like, you know what? Screw it. Let's go get gelato. You know, it's like 5:30 p.m. You know, I'm like thinking of the sugar rush and I'm like, you know what? Whatever. Let's go get gelato. Get whatever you want on it. Like whatever. Let's go crazy. I'm also leaving for 2 weeks. Like I didn't tell you that yet. Sorry, but you know, let's go. And then they were eating. They were like, "This is the best. Like you never let us do this." And I'm like, "This is because of your grandma Shelby. We're doing it because it's her birthday." I'm like, "Thank her. You know, wherever she is, like thank her. This is, you know." And I've figured out ways to kind of like celebrate them in moments that make me feel close to them, and teach my kids in ways that aren't so like, you know. Much in the same way that I approach grief, you know, we use a lot of humor at Modern Loss. We use a lot of levity because I've learned, you know, through working in satire and humor that you can't just like bash someone over the head with something. They'll never come back. You'll get your message through, but they'll never come back. You have to be creative.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
So, yeah, I think, ready?
Okay, I think this is as good a time as any. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you. I'm so happy this is, you've entered my orbit, really. And thank you for sharing a very special evening with us. Modern Loss is out now on Hachette. And don't leave it so long next time. Rebecca Soffer.
So much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Pete and Rebecca, and the audience as well. You've all been so generous in sharing your stories. It's been such a beautiful, powerful conversation, and I'm so pleased that I got to hear it all. Thank you. I will say that if you are interested in either of these books, you can get them here, and I think that Pete and Rebecca will be happy to sign them. The tricky part is that to buy them, you have to sort of go up to the box office because the bookshop, our local lovely bookseller, couldn't be here. So we have to do it from the box office. So I can give it to you, they can sign it, and then it's like a 3-part process, but it's fine.
It's worth the parts.
Yeah, worth every part. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And just, unofficial, literally officially, like, thank you so much to Pete. You're like my new favorite person. I hope that we stay in touch and that, we can be friends. And I just love your work. He's an amazing writer. Please read all of his things. And thank you so much to Rosa McKella. And I just want to tell you how amazing JW3 has been. I stalked them incessantly over the summer while everybody was on holiday. And I was like, I really want to do an event in London. Hi, I'm in New York, like, pay attention to me. And they're like, we're on vacation for a long time. And then finally they got back to me. They got back from holiday and we had this Zoom and they were like, we don't know, it's really short notice, but yeah, let's do it. And we did it, and it happened with so many different amazing people coming together to make it happen. And so I just want to thank JW3 and the community and Reboot. And it's just like, no one ever pulls this off on their own. This is never a solitary, success. It's always a team effort. And I'm just really grateful, especially around this conversation. So thank you, and thank you everybody for coming. Thanks.
That was wonderful. Go back.